The lockout was scheduled for 7:14 in the morning, March 6, 1961, Akron, Ohio, the corner of Bowery and East South Street, just west of the Buckeye Rubber Works gate. The gate 11 men had walked through 5 mornings a week for an average of 23 years each. A cold drizzle was coming down, the kind that gets inside a wool coat and stays there. Walter Kowalski stood on the sidewalk with his lunch pail in his hand. 58 years old, Lithuanian American, born 1 mile from the gate he was looking at. He had been promised a pension that would vest in 9 more days, 25 years to the day. His father had stood at the same gate in the spring of 1923, the year a young rubberworks hand named Tom Morrison had died at his press. Walter did not yet know that a yellow termination notice was taped to the inside of the gate with his name typed on it. A tall man sat in a booth at the diner across the street, long dark coat, wide brim hat resting on the table beside his coffee. He had been in Akron for 9 hours, and he had not slept. In his coat pocket was a small black and white photograph from 1923, the only photograph ever taken of his older brother. By the end of this week, a holding company in Cleveland nobody had heard of would own controlling stock in the Buckeye Rubber Works. 2 cardboard picket signs the men had made the night before would be folded into a wooden crate and stored in a garage on Howard Street for 30 years. And in the spring of 1991, a labor lawyer in Washington would unfold one of those signs and find a name written in blue ink that he had only ever heard whispered. Nobody recognizes him yet. By the end of this, you'll understand why he came back to Akron after 38 years. Here is the story. Walter Kowalski had been born on the kitchen floor of a Lithuanian rooming house on Howard Street in October of 1902. His father, Walter Kowalski Sr., had come from Kaunas in 1898 with a single English phrase taught to him on the ship, "I am a hard worker," and a willingness to use it for the rest of his life. By 1923, the old man was a foreman on the south floor of Buckeye Rubber Works, where a 19-year-old kid named Tom Morrison had come to work on a midnight shift in the February of that year. Tom Morrison was a Southern California boy who had ridden the rails east looking for work because his father had lost the family ranch. Walter Kowalski Sr. taught him the dangerous habits of the press, when to step back, when not to reach in, when to walk away. In April of 1923, Tom Morrison reached in when he should have stepped back. Walter Sr. was the man who closed his eyes. 2 months after the funeral, a 16-year-old runaway arrived at the Kowalski house on Howard Street looking for the foreman. He had ridden the rails east from California to bring his older brother's body home. Walter Sr. gave him supper and a place to sleep for 2 nights, then put him on a freight train going west and pressed $5 into his hand. 38 years passed. In November of 1937, Walter Kowalski Jr. signed his first union contract with Buckeye Rubber Works. The contract guaranteed a pension that would vest after 25 years of continuous service. He worked the press his father had once foremanned. In 1948, he married Helen Krukowski from St. Vincent's Parish. They had a son named Walter III in 1950 and a daughter named Anna in 1953. He sold the second car. He sold his late father's pocket watch. He sold the small piece of land his uncle had left him in Stark County to put a new roof on his mother-in-law's house in 1957. He did not complain about any of it. He had a pension coming, and the pension would carry his family the rest of the way. By February of 1961, Walter Kowalski Jr. had 24 years, 11 months, and 21 days of continuous service. 10 other men on the south floor had between 23 and 26 years. That was the month a man named Vance Pemberton arrived in Akron from a New York consulting firm. He was 36, a graduate of the Wharton School. He had a wife in Greenwich and a Lincoln Continental in long-term parking at the Akron Canton Airport. He had been retained by Buckeye Rubber Works for one purpose: trim, non-vested headcount before the second quarter actuarial reset. He worked from a small office on the 3rd floor of the administration building. He did not visit the south floor. The morning of March 6th was cold and grey. At 7:14 in the morning, the south gate was found locked. 11 men were arriving in a staggered wave from the parking lot. They had a combined 263 years of service. The youngest among them had been at the plant since Franklin Roosevelt's second inauguration. 2 security guards stood inside the gate, apologetic men following instructions written for them the night before. They did not make eye contact. Each of the 11 men was handed a yellow termination notice through the bars of the gate. The notice was 3 paragraphs long. It cited a clause in the company's Articles of Incorporation. It thanked them for their service. It said nothing about pensions because it did not have to. Walter Kowalski stood at the gate holding his lunch pail. He read the notice twice. He looked at the south building beyond the fence, the building his father had worked in, the building he had worked in, the building he had assumed his son would never have to work in because his son was going to college on his pension. He did not say a word. Inside the administration building, Vance Pemberton was at his desk with a cup of coffee from the executive dining room. He had a list of 11 names in front of him and a document confirming the actuarial savings, $84,312 in unvested pension obligations, eliminated by a single legal maneuver executed in a single morning. Pemberton was not a cruel man. He attended St. Mark's Episcopal in Greenwich. He had given his son a baseball glove for his 8th birthday 2 weeks earlier. When he closed his eyes at night, the lie he told himself was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. The pension fund is underfunded. The shareholders have a duty too. If the company is going to survive, somebody has to make these decisions. He had told himself this so many times, he had begun to believe it was a form of mercy. The cruelest things in this country have never been done by cruel men. They have been done by ordinary men with degrees from good schools, who built themselves a comfortable lie and lived inside it. By 7:32 in the morning, the 11 men at the gate had begun to understand what had happened to them. Some of them had wives at home who had been expecting to live the rest of their lives on the pensions promised in 1937. A chair scraped inside the diner across the street. A door opened. The sound of boots on wet pavement carried across Bowery Street. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have ever worked a job for 25 years and watched a man in a clean suit take away what you were promised, type the word pension in the comments. We want to know you are here with us tonight. The tall man crossed Bowery Street with the unhurried walk of someone who had spent 40 years learning he did not need to hurry. He stopped about 10 feet from the gate. He took off his wide-brim hat and held it against his chest. He spoke to the guards in a voice that did not need to be raised to carry. Get the gentleman in charge. 3 minutes later, Vance Pemberton walked out of the administration building with his suit jacket buttoned. He stopped 15 feet from the gate, on the inside of the fence. Can I help you? The men behind me have been told their pensions are not going to vest. That is correct. What is the shortfall? Pemberton hesitated. $84,312 across all 11 men. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather billfold. I will personally cover that amount in full this morning. I will deliver a certified instrument to your office before noon. The men will be on the floor by 1. The 11 men behind him stopped reading their notices. They looked up. Pemberton's mouth opened slightly. He recovered quickly. Sir, I appreciate the offer. I cannot accept it. The pension trust instrument, signed by this company in 1937, explicitly prohibits third-party contributions to accrued obligations. The funds must come from the company itself. They have not. The clause has been triggered. The matter is closed. The stranger nodded slowly. He put the billfold back inside his coat. Is there a deadline to appeal the vesting decision? No. Is there a board meeting before the end of this quarter? Sir, I really must. Is there a board meeting before the end of this quarter? Pemberton paused. The annual meeting is the 2nd Tuesday of May. Thank you. The stranger put his hat back on. He turned. He walked back to the diner, paid for his coffee with a $5 bill, left the change on the counter, and walked out the other door to a black Lincoln parked behind the building. By 8:15, he was on Route 21, driving north toward Cleveland. He could have driven straight on to the Akron Canton Airport. There was a 1 o'clock plane to Burbank. He had a picture starting in 17 days at a studio that paid him more for a single morning's work than the entire 11 men were owed in pensions. He could have telephoned his lawyer in Los Angeles from a payphone and let other men handle whatever happened next. He could have sent $84,000 in an anonymous money order and let the legal complexities sort themselves out in someone else's office. The easy thing was also the invisible thing. But instead he drove 60 miles to Cleveland that morning, and he did not stop until he had done 4 things. First, he walked into the marble lobby of the Cleveland Trust Company at the corner of East 9th and Euclid, and wired $1,200,000 from a holdings account in Los Angeles into a newly opened corporate account under the name Sierra Holdings Limited. Second, he hired a Cleveland attorney named James Ashbury, whose father had clerked for a federal judge in 1934 and who knew Ohio corporate law backwards and forwards. Third, over the next 3 days, Sierra Holdings Limited quietly acquired 53% of the outstanding stock of Buckeye Rubber Works through 3 separate brokerage houses in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. The shares came from 3 minority family shareholders who had been quietly waiting for an acceptable price for years. None of them asked who the buyer was. Fourth, he slept 4 hours at the Hollenden Hotel. At 9 in the morning on Friday, March 10th, James Ashbury and the stranger drove back to Akron. They parked in front of the administration building. They walked up to the 3rd floor. They were directed to the executive boardroom by a startled secretary. The board was already in session. 6 men. They had been told there was an unscheduled matter for their attention. They had not been told what. The stranger walked in first. James Ashbury walked in second with a leather folio. The boardroom went silent. The stranger took off his hat. He laid 3 things on the polished walnut boardroom table. First, the stock certificates representing 53% ownership. Second, a notarized letter requiring the immediate vesting of the 11 men's pensions under the authority of the controlling shareholder. Third, a yellowed black and white photograph from a 1923 Buckeye Rubber Works company picnic. The photograph showed a young man in dark work clothes standing beside a heavy older man with a thick mustache. The older man was Walter Kowalski Sr. The young man was Tom Morrison. The chairman of the board picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at the stock certificates. He looked at the stranger's face. He recognized him. The recognition went through the chairman like a cold wind through an open door. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. James Ashbury cleared his throat. The stranger spoke without raising his voice. "You are going to vest those 11 pensions today. You are going to honor every commitment this company made to those men in 1937, and you are going to write Mr. Pemberton's consulting contract a check for the full amount owed and ask him politely to find work in another city." The chairman picked up the phone on the table without looking at it. The pensions were vested by noon. By the end of the day, the 11 men had been notified by certified messenger at their homes. Each of them retired with honor. 2 cardboard picket signs they had made on the night of March 5th in Frank Petrillo's basement were folded carefully and stored in a wooden crate in Walter Kowalski's garage. One of them had a pencil note Walter had written on the back at 3 in the morning when he could not sleep. The note said, "If this works, tell my grandson someday what an honest day's work was supposed to mean." The stranger came to the small house on Howard Street that Friday afternoon. He stood on the front porch with his hat in his hand. He did not come inside. He gave Walter one moral request. He gave it quietly, because that was the only way he ever gave anything. "Don't tell anyone it was me, Mr. Kowalski, and the next time you hear about a man in a clean suit doing this to 11 other men somewhere, I want you to stand up. Stand up loud. Stand up so the next 11 men behind you can hear what it sounds like." Have you ever worked a job for 25 years and lain awake wondering whether the men who ran it would honor a single word they had signed? Have you ever watched a man in a clean suit explain to your face why a promise made in writing to your father did not apply to you? Have you ever wondered why the cruelest things in this country are so often done, not by men with guns, but by men with calculators and degrees from good universities? Sometimes the only thing standing between 11 working men and a poverty most of them had spent their lives outrunning is a stranger who remembers a brother who died at a tire press 38 winters before. Walter Kowalski signed his pension receipt at the Buckeye Rubber Works finance office at 11 in the morning on the following Monday. The clerk slid the papers toward him one at a time. He signed where he was told to sign. His hand was steady because the men of the South floor had always known how to sign their names when it mattered. When the last paper was signed, he looked up. "Ma'am," he said, "I have to know who he was, so I can tell my grandson someday." The clerk did not know. That afternoon, Walter took the streetcar back to the diner across from the south gate. He asked the waitress if a tall man in a long dark coat had been in that morning. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "He left 2 hours ago, mister. He told me to give this to anyone who came looking for him." She handed Walter a folded oilcloth packet, sealed with a band of waxed string. Walter did not open it. He put it in the pocket of his coat, went home, and laid it in the wooden crate in the garage with the 2 picket signs he had not used. He did not open the packet for the rest of his life. The stranger's flight to Burbank had taken off at 4:47 that Friday afternoon from the Akron Canton Airport. One person in Cleveland recognized him that week. Her name was Helena Markovitz. She had been the assistant trust officer at the Cleveland Trust Company who had processed the wire transfer that Monday morning. In 1944, when she was 21 years old, she had been a USO performer at a hospital benefit in Pasadena, where she had seen the same man from across a recovery ward. She kept the matter to herself for 25 years. She told her granddaughter about it on a Sunday afternoon in 1986, in a small kitchen in Shaker Heights, 4 months before she died. "I swear it was John Wayne," she said. "He came in there, and he never raised his voice once." Walter Kowalski Jr. retired with his full pension on April 14, 1961. He lived another 28 years. He used part of the lump sum to send his son to Akron University and his daughter to nursing school. He used part of it to pay off the mortgage on the small house on Howard Street his father had bought in 1928. The rest he put aside in a college fund for a grandchild who had not yet been born. In 1962, his son had a son of his own. They named him Thomas. Walter Kowalski Jr. carried his grandson into the small Lithuanian Catholic church on Howard Street to be baptized in October of that year. Thomas Kowalski went to Ohio State on the lump sum his grandfather had quietly put away for him. He went to law school at Case Western Reserve. He turned down 2 firms in Columbus and 1 in Chicago. In 1986, he joined the AFL-CIO General Counsel's office in Washington as a junior staff attorney. In June of 1987, Thomas Kowalski wrote the principal brief in a Supreme Court case brought on behalf of 340 Pennsylvania steel mill workers who had been locked out 4 months before their pensions vested. The case was decided 6-3 in favor of the workers. Walter Kowalski Jr. watched the verdict on the evening news in his small living room on Howard Street. He turned the volume down and sat for a long time. Then he went into the garage and stood for a long time in front of the wooden crate where 2 picket signs had been folded for 26 years. He did not open the crate. Vance Pemberton was let go from his consulting work 2 weeks after the events of March 1961. He could not find consulting work in Akron again. He moved to Pittsburgh and took a position as a mid-level operations manager at a steel concern. He died of liver failure in 1979 at the age of 54. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was 3 lines long. Walter Kowalski Jr. died at home on Howard Street on November 2, 1989, age 86. His son and his grandson were beside him. In the spring of 1991, Thomas Kowalski helped his father clean out the garage on Howard Street to prepare the house for sale. In a wooden crate near the back wall, beneath a folded canvas tarp, Thomas found 2 yellowed cardboard picket signs. On the back of one, in faded pencil, was a sentence he could just barely read. "If this works, tell my grandson someday what an honest day's work was supposed to mean." Taped to the inside of the crate beneath the signs was a small oilcloth packet sealed with a band of waxed string. The string was brittle. He cut it. Inside the packet were 3 things: a small yellowed black and white photograph from a 1923 Buckeye Rubber Works company picnic, a photostat copy of a stock certificate transfer agreement dated March 10, 1961, under the name Sierra Holdings Limited, and a folded letter on cream stationery, written in blue ink in a steady, deliberate hand. The letter was short. It thanked Walter Kowalski Sr. for the kindness he had shown a young man named Tom Morrison in the winter and spring of 1923, for teaching him the dangerous habits of the press, for standing at the back of his funeral, for opening his home one summer to a 16-year-old runaway who had come east on a freight train to bring his brother's body home. It said the boy had grown up. It said the boy had spent 40 years promising himself he would come back to Akron someday to thank the family of the foreman who had treated his brother like a son. It was signed Marion Robert Morrison. Thomas Kowalski held the letter for a long time. Then he walked into the small living room of the house his grandfather had lived in for 61 years. On the mantel above the cold fireplace stood a single framed, signed, black and white publicity photograph sent to Walter Kowalski Jr. after a 1963 charity benefit in Cleveland that Walter had quietly attended, just to see the man from across a hospital ward. The handwriting matched. In the autumn of 1998, the Kowalski family donated the 2 cardboard picket signs and the cream letter to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. They hang today in the wing marked American Labor, 1880 to 1980. The placard beneath the picket signs is short because Thomas Kowalski, by then a senior staff attorney at the AFL-CIO and a 46-year-old man with a daughter of his own, insisted on the wording himself. The placard reads, Akron Rubber Workers Picket Signs, March 1961, cardboard and pencil. These signs were made on the night of March 5, 1961, by 11 men of the Buckeye Rubber Works who were to be locked out the next morning, 9 days before their 25-year pensions vested. The signs were never used. A stranger arrived at the gate the next morning with a $1.2 million stock acquisition and forced the company to honor its obligations. All 11 men retired with their full pensions. The stranger asked that his name be left off this card. We have honored his request. Thomas Kowalski was asked, by the curator, whether he was sure he did not want the donor named. He said he was sure. He said the family had thought about it for a long time, and they had decided to leave it the way the man had wanted it. He said he had not come back to Akron for his name. 11 men about to lose what their fathers had bled for. A cold system run by an ordinary man with a degree from a good school who had built himself a comfortable lie and lived inside it. A tall stranger with a hat in his hand who remembered a brother who had died at a tire press in 1923, and a holding company nobody had heard of, and a foreman's kindness extended 38 winters before. He never told anyone what he had done. He never raised his voice once. If this story reached you tonight, do me a favor. Pass it on. Share it with a son or a daughter or a grandchild who has never stood at a factory gate at 7 in the morning and watched their 25 years of work taken from them by a man in a clean suit. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more quiet stories coming every night at midnight, and unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.